I'm gonna have to get something up here, up here. I can just point in real life. Up here seems very plain to me, but I don't have anything for it right now. I think I'm gonna get a mantle and I'll put some of my like doodads and stuff up there. But we're just gonna have to deal with it right now. Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Indie Book Club for the month of August. As you can tell by my outfit, we are going a little bit towards the Halloween-y side of things. In my opinion, it's never too early. Actually, our next few books are going to be dealing with some Halloween stuff and the occult and the dead, so that's all very exciting. This is not the book for this month. I don't even know what this is. I know all about guys like Cullen Hunt. Cullen, not Colin. Gorgeous, wealthy, powerful. I just fled New York to escape one. That's not really a plot, but I guess you could see where that's going. Anyway, just stupid, we're not gonna talk about that. The book we are gonna talk about this month is our urban fantasy paranormal adventure, Eyes of the Grave, the Rebecca Devereux series, book number 1 by Chelsea Callahan. When witch/medium Rebecca Devereux finds her most recent almost client dead in a New Orleans cemetery, her connection with the deceased puts her on the top of the suspect list. Only her estranged detective husband and her medical examiner cousin believe she didn't do it. She wants to trust them, but how can she when her own visions reveal that the murderer is her? What? Yes. Obviously, this book is urban fantasy, which is one of my favorite genres to read, to write, to talk about. And this book pretty much has everything you want in an urban fantasy book. That's why this month's reasons to read is a little bit odd because I don't have 3. There's literally like, why wouldn't you read this book? So a little bit of background. Rebecca is a medium that has kind of, if you've read The Dead Zone by Stephen King, it's that kind of power where she can touch someone and she can see how they're gonna die. And so at the beginning of the book, she is in a cemetery because a person who wanted to hire her as a private detective asked her to meet her there in the big New Orleans cemetery. I forget the name. Lafayette, maybe? I'm not totally sure. Anyways, so she gets there and the client that called to meet her is dead in a very mysterious, occulty sort of way. She's on a grave. It's weird. And the police show up right away, including her ex-husband detective, who, as I mentioned, is also a werewolf. Already we've got a mysterious death that's probably witchy. We've got a medium/private eye who can see how people die, and we've got a werewolf. And that's all in like the first 15 pages. So right away, you've got a ton of intrigue, stakes that are crazy. You're off and running right away. Come to find out a little bit later that she does a reading on the body and she sees herself kill the girl. She's already kind of predisposed to this idea because, mild spoilers, the reason her husband is her ex-husband is because she saw his death and she also saw herself kill him too. So she's already kind of like not really sure what's going on with herself. So she can't let her husband know for a while, and then she does. And then her cousin medical examiner gets involved too, who also has some like witchy powers. Like the whole Devereux family, as you find out later, is this like witchy royalty in Louisiana, and her cousin can astral project. There's portals, there's secret rooms, there's, you know, like demons, there's monsters, there's secret family history. It's literally everything you want in an urban fantasy book. The story grips you and just keeps you going through the whole thing. The only stuff I really found wrong with it is what I'm going to talk about in the writer's takeaway, and it's literally the most minute kind of stuff. It's so picky, I almost didn't even want to mention it because I don't want anyone not reading this, like using it as an excuse to not read this book. But I gotta say something. So I'm calling the writer's takeaway for this month Peeve Potpourri because it literally is just a bunch of little stuff that, while hinder my ability to enjoy the book. I loved the book. It's some of my favorite kind of writing. It did strike me, and I did notice it, and it did at times pull me away from the story. So the first pet peeve I'm going to bring up is a consistent problem I saw with homophones. And for those of you that don't know what homophones are, those are words that sound the same when you pronounce them out loud, but they're either spelled differently and or they have a different meaning. In most cases, when they're spelled differently, they have a different meaning. Not to be confused with homonyms, which are spelled exactly the same but have different meanings. There were enough that I kept notes on what they were, and I would write them down whenever I saw them. So one of the ones I saw a lot was seeping through her pores, spelled P-O-U-R-S. Pores as in skin, which is what I took the sentence to mean, is P-O-R-E-S. Like I said, this is so minute, like I don't even really want to talk about it, but there were a lot of those. There was like peeled off her clothes, which was spelled P-E-A-L-E-D, like a peel of laughter, instead of P-E-E-L, like a banana peel. I think my favorite though was donned a new set of fresh black underwear, which was spelled D-A-W-N-E-D, which was like the dawning of the sun, instead of D-O-N-N-E-D, which is how you don clothes. After a while, it was just kind of like, oh, there's another one, I found it. It was kind of like a game, actually. And it's only gonna be me or, you know, people who are kind of a little bit grammatically sticklers for things and spelling sticklers. Like I said, I don't really care, but it did stand out. The other thing I want to point out real quick is actually not an issue with this book in an overt sort of way, or like a very strong presence of it in this book, but it is something that did come up once or twice, and it's something I think we should talk about, and that is the use of filter phrases. I did find a couple in this book. Again, not a ton, but enough that it's a good time to talk about them because they're extremely important. So a filter phrase in writing is another way to tell versus show a reader that something is happening, and it's usually indicated by the use of a feeling word, such as she heard a loud noise, or she felt cold, or she smelled something bad. Now, depending on the type of writing you're doing or how quickly you want the scene to move, that might be fine. You know, if you're in a really fast-paced scene, if it's super actiony, you're in the middle of a fight, like smelling gasoline is fine. If you're in a slower scene, especially one where you're trying to build up suspense or tension, or if you're just in, you know, a scene where not a whole lot is happening or there's a conversation going on, and you want to add a little bit of descriptive interest, you can pull those phrases out a little bit more. So instead of she felt cold, icy shivers wrapped her body, or he smelled something bad, the pungent aroma of rotten eggs assaulted his nose. Now, again, depending on the situation, that might be too much. And these are off the top of my head, so they're not the best thing probably. But it's like that. That is how you can evoke and show versus telling how someone felt. What that does is it pulls the reader in with a very specific and descriptive moment, and it helps the reader really put themselves in the place of the character in a more specific and visceral kind of way. Like I said, not a ton of this going on in Eyes of the Grave, certainly not enough where I felt like I was getting cheated or anything like that. Just something I saw once or twice, and because it is a, you know, pretty important thing to be aware of, I wanted to bring it up. I wanted to make sure we talked about it somewhere in Indie Book Club. And as I said, I don't really have a whole lot to criticize about this book. There wasn't, you know, a ton to take away from it in this respect, so I kind of just threw it in here because we have the time. Actually, the fact that there isn't a whole lot to talk about or take away from this book in an educational sense is kind of an interesting question to explore on its own. You know, it's an entertaining book. It's totally competent. The story flows really well. All the magic is explained super great, and it's not complicated magic. It's very, oh, she touches people and she knows how they die, and oh, he's a werewolf, just straight up werewolf. It's a really solid book, but there's not a whole lot that sets it apart from other books just like it. And if you know anything about the urban fantasy genre, it's a massive genre, especially in self-publishing. Self-publishing has kind of taken ownership of urban fantasy, I feel, in some ways, which is why when I was querying a book that I tagged as urban fantasy at the time, nobody wanted to give me the time of day. They were saying urban fantasy is dead. It is not dead. There are tons of readers, there are tons of writers. What they mean is you're gonna have a really hard time getting a traditional publisher for it because it's so saturated by indies and by, Jim Butchers and, the people who got in on the ground floor of it and really founded the industry to their credit. But like once you have a Jim Butcher, you don't need another one. In that sense, when you're writing an urban fantasy, it takes a ton to really stand out and make your book unique. And, unfortunately, it begs the question, like, is it enough to just have a totally competent urban fantasy book? I don't know. Like, what I can tell you about Eyes of the Grave is I liked reading it. I want to read the next one. I want to read her other series, She's a competent author. Obviously, she knows the genre, she knows the tropes, she knows how to make it interesting. So, like, I'm sold on this book. But if this book hadn't come to me through Indie Book Club, would I have ever found it? Would it have stood out to me enough to pick it up and read it? And that, I'm never gonna be able to answer. I'm glad I know about it now, and I hope everyone who watches this will give it a shot. That's a tough road for marketing, where, you're working in a genre that like competency and even good story, like good book, is not enough to really get seen. And that's not a critique, that's not a slam, that's just like pointing out anyone who's writing urban fantasy, that is the road you have to go down. That is the road you are signing up for when you take that genre. It's a fun genre to write, it's why I think a lot of people are writing it. But you really do need something that hooks, something that stands out. So as you're writing, I would really keep that in mind. That's such a downer. Oh my God, I don't want to leave it on that. I don't want to discourage new urban fantasy. Urban fantasy is a great genre. It's so much fun. And it's, I think part of the reason people like it is because you can use what you know of the world around you and add magic to it. And in these times when the world seems so lost for magic and lost for anything hopeful sometimes, you just want to escape into something like that. Even books like Eyes of the Grave, where you're talking about murder and death and family tragedy and things like that, it's still an escape. So, I mean, we need books like that. We do need books like that. We need lots of books like that. Maybe why so many writers writing it and readers reading it. So don't be discouraged by what I just said. Keep writing your urban fantasy books. Just be ready for a little bit of a difficult road, but the audience is there. The audience is definitely there, and that's good. At least you know that you do have readers out there. You just have to find a way to punch through other titles and big name titles, but it can be done. It can absolutely be done. There are new urban fantasy stories, new urban fantasy writers making names for themselves every day, and with enough hard work, I think anyone can be one of them. So keep on writing. When you're done with your urban fantasy book, come see me. I'd be happy to talk about it on here. I love them. They're my favorite, truly. And as I said, Chelsea Callahan has found another reader in me, and I hope she's found one in you too. Thank you for joining me once again here on Indie Book Club. If you are interested in good urban fantasy at all, go pick up Eyes of the Grave. That's the cover right there. The first cover I had was an angel with bleeding eyes, and that I like this better. I think it's a lot more fitting for the genre. That one looked a little bit like almost like literary cover. So that's another thing to think about when you're doing urban fantasy, is make sure you're following the, at least some of the conventions of your cover. So people are urban fantasy covers are really very specific. So that's another thing to note about urban fantasy. Next month, we will continue our journey towards Halloween with another death-focused book. This one is a teen and YA paranormal outcast book by another Vegas author. It is called Alex McKenna and the Geranium Deaths. It is the first in a series. It is by Vicky M. Bush. It is great, and I cannot wait to introduce this to you. I believe the series is 4 books. 3 of them are written, and the 4th one, I believe she just finished. So the 4th and final. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Indie Book Club, please do so. We can use the support, and it helps us get the word out. Like the video if you liked it. Go watch our other videos. We've got other great books, other great lessons. If you want to find us on social media, we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Medium. I feel like there are more, but I can't think of them right now. And if you want to get these videos and other great Ugly Cat information in your inbox, you can sign up for our newsletter that is delivered twice a month, and we promise no more unless there's some really good deal that comes up. But otherwise, 2 times a month, and that's it. Thank you again so much for joining, for supporting, and we will see you next month. Bye.